Vladimir Putin is responding to Russia's losses in Ukraine. He's also taking aim at Canada and other NATO countries that back Ukraine. In a national address this morning, the Russian leader accuses the West of what he calls nuclear blackmail. Putin makes a new threat as well.
А те, кто пытаются шантажировать нас ядерным оружием, должны знать, что роза ветров может развернуться и в их сторону.
Putin is mobilizing 300,000 Russian reservists. Russia's defense minister says that call-up will be limited to reservists with military experience. In a new revelation, the defense minister now says almost 6,000 troops have been killed fighting in Ukraine. Now, that's the first official announcement of Russian losses since March. But Western military observers believe the actual number of Russian dead is far higher, potentially numbering in the tens of thousands. Senior correspondent Briar Stewart joins us now from London. Briar, you're part of our CBC News team covering Russia's war in Ukraine, and you brought your experience reporting from Moscow to your coverage. Let's start with Vladimir Putin's decision to call up hundreds of thousands of new troops. Still, Putin won't call this a war, but what do we make of his new move?
Well, I think the only way you can take it, John, is this is a clear signal of just how much Russia is struggling in Ukraine. There have been rumors about mobilization swirling for months, even back in February, before the tanks moved into Ukraine. And analysts that we talked to and outside observers always said that Putin was so hesitant to do that because it would basically be a wake-up call to Russia that the country was at war. And so now you have this decision for a partial mobilization to call up 300,000 young men. It's from a pool of about 2.5 million men that are eligible. These are young men in their 20s who have served in the military before because they went through kind of a mandatory conscription. So now they're going to be called up. And I can tell you that just a short while ago, I spoke with a young man in his 20s who received one of these draft notices. He's a university student, and actually on his paper that he got, it said he'd be drafted into the military to perform a technical role. He told us that he went down to the office, and when he was given his paperwork back, they'd actually changed it to say that he should be serving as a frontline soldier. Now, he's not sure what to do, and so he's going down to the office with his father to see if they can straighten it out. But this is really, by calling this mobilization, this really kind of brings the war home to people in Russia, because for so long, the government has been, trying to push this narrative that what's happening in Ukraine is only a special military operation and that life, for the most part, continues as normal in Russia. Well, this partial mobilization really shatters that idea.
Something else to try to unpack in all of this, Briar, is that, as we heard, Putin is also leveling new accusations at the West, warning that an escalation to nuclear weapons if Russian territory is threatened. So let's talk about how this threat might factor into the new scramble by pro-Russian breakaway republics and Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine to join Russia.
Well, that's right. And obviously, the nuclear threat coming from Putin is not new. He has made this threat a number of times, but the context in which it's being made right now is quite different. And as you mentioned, you have these four regions, in Ukraine that are occupied by Russia: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. And all of them, in a joint move, basically have hastily called these referendums that are going to begin Friday. And so Russia says it supports the referendums, and it's basically setting the stage for Russia to annex these territories. And what's important here is that if that happens and Russia claims this area as their own, what happens then when Ukraine tries to take them back and, begins firing weapons into those areas? What then? Well, what Putin says is that would basically give Russia license to use whatever means at its disposal to defend itself, to defend its, quote, territorial integrity. Now, Putin in his speech did say that he was not bluffing when it came to the nuclear threat. You still do have some analysts that we've spoken to who say, they don't think Russia's willing to go down that road because Putin knows just what that would mean if Russia were to ready their nuclear weapons. But I do think it is all very worrying, and you have to remember that before Russia invaded, there were a lot of observers, too, that said Russia wasn't going to do that. So I do think that this is an unpredictable regime, and where you are right now, you can see that Russia is clearly struggling. It did just lose a large chunk of Ukraine that it had seized during the invasion, and it is in a desperate situation.
Thanks, Briar. Senior correspondent Briar Stewart in London.